Jumping into the 20th century, the first individual that I want to talk about is Warren Manning. Warren Manning was working on a project in Billerica, Massachusetts in 1909, and he developed a method for mapping and overlaying multiple sets of landscape information on transparent trace paper. He overlaid trace paper maps on top of one another on top of a light table to be able to see through the multiple sheets of trace paper and begin to understand relationships between the different information sets he was working with. This was the beginning of a systematic evaluation of landscape information, and we will use his system of map overlay analysis extensively in this course. In his initial system, he developed natural resource information, mapping it onto transparent trace paper, and we see here mapping soil types on the one hand and vegetation on the other hand, overlaying the two of these transparent traced maps on a light table where he could begin to see relationships between soils and vegetation. He could do this with other pieces of landscape information, areas that are likely to flood, areas that have significant wildlife habitat, and he could begin to overlay those two maps on the soils and vegetation map to get a much richer understanding of the landscape. He could see relationship between soils, vegetation, and all of the other dimensions he was mapping. The overlay of multiple sets of natural resource information system permitted visualization of multiple landscape relationships among the landscape layers. It served as a methodological precedent for contemporary landscape planning. So a lot of the things you're going to be doing in the class, you're going to be doing rather than paper and pencil on a computer, but they serve the same purpose as Manning's overlay analysis did. We can see this work from Ian McHarg in 1969 that I'll talk more about in just a minute, but I just want to show them here because they nicely illustrate Manning's overlay analysis. In this case, McHarg worked with the same landscape, 15 different maps for exactly the same landscape, and he's mapping, for example, slope, surface drainage, soil drainage, land values, scenic values, recreation values, residential values, and he's mapping each of these landscape components in terms of how suitable the landscape element is for location of a new highway. So we can talk about slopes and the areas that are white in the slope map represent areas that are well suited from the standpoint of slope for location of a new highway. The areas that are gray represent areas that are moderately suitable. The areas that are black represent areas that are highly suitable. He could map this same set of information across surface drainage, across soil drainage, across recreation values, and take these 15 distinct overlays and superimpose them on top of one another on a light table. So we can see in the left-hand image very clearly the manifestation of several different pieces of information all being overlaid on top of one another. And by doing this analysis, he was able to get an overall sense of how the landscape fit together with respect to suitability for location of a new highway. In 1928, a gentleman by the name of Benton MacKay wrote a very influential book called The New Exploration. This was in this book, MacKay construed regional development to be a series of flows along transportation corridors. And then natural features and natural areas were construed as levees that would guide the flow of development. So in this diagram on the right, we can see the conceptualization of regional development as a series of flows and levees, where development flows along transportation corridors. Along these transportation corridors, either radiating out from the center of a community or moving around the community. And natural systems then in the center and right-hand diagram being ways of guiding the flow of development along these transportation corridors. So in other words, we're using natural resource and environmental information to be able to identify where to put the new highways and how to use the natural system levees as a way to organize communities associated with the patterns of development. This strategy was used in creating a plan for Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and we can see the flows coming out of the center of Fitchburg. We see the natural system levees that were directing the pattern of the flow, and then we see the final map of the flows along the transportation corridors being guided by the levees created by the natural systems. He took this up to the scale of the state of Massachusetts, and we can see for the entire state of the Massachusetts in 1928, flows of development moving along major highway patterns and railroad patterns, levees of natural systems, whether they be vegetation or hydrologic or topographic systems, and then the integration of the levees and the flows to create a master plan for development of the state of Massachusetts.